Good evening, everyone. Good evening. There you go. I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and Director for the Center for Community Uplift. It is my honor and pleasure to present to you today a wonderful event, Building Wealth for Latino and Hispanic-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. Give that a round of applause. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Center for Community Uplift and its goals. You know, too often we are inundated with a narrative that of a zero-sum game around economic development, that if you invest in one group, you're taking away from another. And that just does not hold up empirically. I will not present these data, but we have presented data in the past that shows that as the well-being for one group goes up, so does the well-being for other groups. And that is true particularly for the Hispanic population. And so what you will hear today is you hear from a group of people who are committed to providing investments in the people and places that truly are worthy of investment. In this country, our fates are inextricably linked. And as one group is uplifted, so is another. So it is in that spirit that we do this work at the Center for Community Uplift. I also want to thank all of you for coming because this work could not be done without your partnership. It is really an honor to present to you some of our partners today. You will hear from Aries, but there's a lot of people out there that are working diligently to uplift all people, all citizens, all potential citizens in this United States. So I just want to thank you up front for that work. Today, you already experienced the reception. Hopefully you got your drinks so that I'm enjoyable right now. We're going to hear a few remarks from Michelle Armstrong from Aries, and then we're going to have a brief research presentation and then a panel discussion with my colleagues Bria Marie Hodges and Marissa Calderon. And then we'll have a fireside chat with Mike Argoretti, Director and Co-founder, Chief Executive Officer and President of Aries Management Corporation, and my boss, Rob Puentes, Vice President and Director of Brookings Metro. And then we'll have a few closing remarks. So with that, I'm going to invite Michelle Armstrong, who is the Managing Director and President of Aries Charitable Foundation.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank all of you for venturing out on this very rainy, very gray Monday evening to spend time with us. As Andre noted just now, I am Michelle Armstrong. I'm president of the Aries Charitable Foundation, and we are the grant-making philanthropic arm of Aries Management Corporation, which is one of the world's leading alternative investment management firms. Now, Aries has a long-standing commitment to social good, and we actually formalized on that commitment in 2021 with the launch of the Aries Charitable Foundation. The Aries Foundation's mission is to help accelerate economic equity and equality, because as a firm, we believe in shared prosperity, and that accords very closely with the mission of the foundation. As a firm, we also believe in innovation, and as a foundation, we are always looking for ways to innovatively help problem solve the challenges that keep us all up at night. We are very excited for this opportunity to examine entrepreneurship in particular, because we look at helping small business owners stand up and scale up businesses as not only an opportunity for them, but also an opportunity for those they hire, because those businesses create jobs. And when you help bring businesses into communities and you help stand up jobs in those communities, then we believe that everyone wins. Communities like right here in Baltimore. I want to also point out that tonight is not only an opportunity for you to hear from our esteemed speakers and panelists, but it also marks the launch of a new initiative that the Aries Foundation is standing up through a grant that we are executing with Brookings Institution. And that initiative is called Elevate, which stands for Examining Latino Entrepreneurship for Value Add to the Economy. Over the next 18 months, we will be working with Brookings to publish a series of issue briefs that examine topics that are most relevant to Latino entrepreneurs, particularly to help understand the challenges and opportunities that face them. This includes understanding the current state of Latino entrepreneurship and also exploring topics like the effects of AI and emerging technologies on their businesses, and also understanding how they can help address existential challenges like climate change by helping to address those kinds of threats. We believe that there is a twofold imperative for the work that we're looking to do. From a business perspective, the key takeaways that we glean from Elevate will help us to think as a firm about our own best practices when it comes to procurement, supplier diversity, and what we invest in. And from a philanthropic perspective, Elevate will help us understand how we look at returns on philanthropic investments, not just in the sense of dollars and cents, but also what it means to actually improve people's quality of life in meaningful, measurable, sustainable ways. So we're very excited about the opportunity to bring these two esteemed organizations together. Aries Management Corporation, which has incredible investment acumen, and of course the world-renowned Brookings Institution, which is known for its rigor and its intellect in being able to analyze and communicate key findings about data and issues that we all think about on a regular basis. And we're very excited and hope that you will stay engaged with us over this 18-month journey as we continue to share out those lessons learned and also issue calls to action about what we can do to actually take and operationalize what we are learning through Elevate so that we're making a real difference in communities here across the U.S. Thank you again for the time that you're taking with us this evening, and I'll just end by adding one additional point, and that is that we see philanthropic dollars as catalytic dollars. We look at our philanthropy as the opportunity to test and to scale up initiatives that hopefully will help to address some of the root disparities of causes, or root disparities of issues that we see, and address those causes in a way that really allows people to think about challenges in ways that they never have thought of them, and to also be creative when it comes to best ways of helping to address them. So with that, I'm very, again, appreciative of your time and of your commitment to learning more about this work that we're doing, and certainly to hearing what our guests this evening have to say as you hear their perspectives and their insights on these very critical topics. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to you, Andre.
Now, you know a scholar comes with their PowerPoint, so I'm going to go right into it. You've never seen a Brookings scholar without a good PowerPoint, I don't think. But building wealth in Latino and Hispanic-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. So I'm going to just set the table a little bit, give you a little bit of information about some demographics here. As we know, Latinos or Hispanics represent the largest rate of population growth in the United States. On this chart prepared for my colleague Bill Fry, you can see that Hispanic growth is far outpacing every other racial category in the United States. We do have negative population growth among our white brothers and sisters. It's pretty neutral with American Indian and Alaskan Native population. But you can see the Hispanic population represents the largest population growth in the United States. Now, how does that reflect in terms of wealth? This is the current state of the wealth distribution by race. The black population, the median wealth is about $45,000. Non-white Hispanic, about $62,000. Whites, about $285,000, and that dreaded other category, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander. You know, we need to break that down to each particular group, but we're going to move forward for now at $536,000 per year. So as you know, that wealth is probably the strongest economic predictor of many life outcomes, and so it's pivotal that we ensure that people have the wealth they need to grow and thrive. Now, those numbers I just presented are all up from the previous time we measured wealth 3 years prior. And so on this chart, you can see that wealth has been growing among all groups. This is a chart, particularly among Black and wealth, which is the blue, Hispanic, which is the orange, and Asian Pacific Islanders, Native Americans in that green area. And so you can see wealth has actually been growing among all groups. But I want to layer in white wealth to show you that you can have wealth growth among some groups, but it pales in comparison to white wealth. So you can see here what essentially is the accumulation of wealth during a period of discrimination where people were prohibited to get certain assets, which eventually led to fewer intergenerational wealth transfers and less money to pour into investments in themselves. So wealth is growing among Black and brown individuals, but white wealth is growing at a phenomenal pace. So it's important that we make sure that we invest in the assets that are available to Black, Hispanic, and other groups. Now, as I stated, wealth is growing among all groups. This is a chart of growth of Black and Latino wealth, of wealth of all groups and by asset classes. You see that orange bar? That represents housing. For both Black and Latino groups, most of our wealth comes out of the housing market. And as you can see, for the Black population, second is business equity. But for the Hispanic population, it's wanting. We really need to bump that up. So I wanted to provide some of that demographic information to set the stage to what we're dealing with. I failed to mention that you can see with white and other groups, a lot of the wealth is generated in the stock market, in securities. So certainly there needs to be a more robust conversation about wealth development overall. We do need to talk more about wealth than housing, certainly business development, but we do need to have a conversation about the stock market and other ways to increase wealth, including new ways to develop asset classes, things like baby bonds and such. So I want to show you the growth in Latino-owned employer firms by gender of owner from 2017 to 2021. So the orange bar represents Hispanic women, the blue bar represents men, and you can see over the course, men represent the largest share of employer firms with more than one employee. And you can see the growth overall. Interestingly, there was less growth among women from 2020 to 2021. There may be some error there because of the survey during that time, but certainly that's a little different from the other groups. But you can see the gender breakdown. Now, but let's be clear, the rate of change in business characteristics are actually improving in many different categories. The total number of employer firms are up by more than 25 or close to 25%. Revenue is up by close to 35%. Employees are up, and payroll is up for Latinos in this country. For the most part, this is a story of good news, that we're seeing growth, and we would like to see more businesses created, merged, acquired, because we also see that population shift and the wealth disparities. Now, what industries are Latinos represented in terms of businesses? Construction, accommodation, food services, professional, scientific, and technical services, so tax preparers and that big range. And then waste management are the big groups that we've come to know Latinos owning businesses in. But as you see on the smaller end, manufacturing, finance and insurance, wholesale trade, there are smaller numbers. So that's the area for growth. We can see that there's talent there. One of the studies that I'll just highlight, we scraped all the Yelp data from businesses all across the country, and we found that Black, brown, and Asian-owned firms actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts. There was an old adage that I used to hear in my community. They would say, our ice is just as cold. That is true, particularly for Latino, Asian, and Black-owned firms. And so we just need to see that investment in that quality. Now here's the top 10 metro areas for the number of Latino-owned employer firms. Some of this tracks with the population, so no question there are more Latino businesses in Miami, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. Those are where you see your big number of employer firms. And the reason why we spotlight employer firms, I should have mentioned that, is because we actually see the rate of starting businesses about the same among all races. But where we see the big gaps are in the firms with more than one employee. And so what we're trying to do is scale up that number, because that's where wealth is created, in employer firms. Now here are the top 10 metro areas for the ratio of Latino-owned employer businesses to the proportion of residents. So compared to the population size in the metro area and the number of employer firms. And we took out those places with less than 10% of the Latino population. And we see Miami Beach is represented, North Point, Sarasota, Laredo, Texas, El Paso. So we need to look at those places to see what are the conditions on the ground. How's lending? How's wealth distribution? What are the supplier issues there? We can learn a lot from the places that are doing well, and in general, that's the approach we take with the Center for Community Uplift. We start by looking at the places of strength, the places that are doing well, learning from those places, and say, hey, here's some places that are not doing so well. Maybe try these things. And finally, again, top 10 metro areas for the proportion of Latino-owned employer businesses. Did I just mess that up, Hannah? No, that's same thing, but same share. Laredo, Texas, Eagle Pass, McAllen, El Paso, Brownsville. Now, I wanted just to share the top 20 fastest growing metro areas with, in terms of businesses. You see that they're all over the place. The Midwest, the West, some in the East, Dover, Delaware. They are growing like leaps and bounds in many metro areas across the United States, and we need to learn from those places. But there are places where we see rapid declines. College Station, Texas, Napa, California, Mobile, Alabama, Huntsville, Trenton, New Jersey. We're seeing losses in the share of employer firm all across the United States. So we need to learn what's happening there, because we're seeing population growth in many of those places, but what's happening in these places? So to dig a little deep in this data, I've invited my friends to talk with me. I'm going to have my colleagues move towards the stage. I'm going to welcome Bria Marie Hodges, Director of Small Business Development for the Latino Economic Development Center. Raise your hand. Give her a round. And Marissa Calderon, President and CEO of Prosperity Now. So I'm going to move over.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm a lot less formal, so we're going to be making some jokes and laughing and have a good time.
So what did you think about the data? What struck you the most from the presentation and the data?
What struck me the most? what struck me the most, it's something that I've known, but it's good to see numbers behind it, and you saying that the rate of opening businesses is the same, but the growth is a little bit different. And I think what a lot of people fail to realize is that we're talking about a population that is learning English as a second language sometimes. So when you're coming into a country and you're also trying to learn the systems, it's hard to grow a business and understand the resources that are available to you if they're literally not in the language that you speak. So seeing the numbers behind that and seeing the growth, seeing that there's the employees, businesses with more than one employee, the reason is because our communities need help scaling, growing those businesses so that we can grow that wealth as well.
You know, Prosperity now does a lot of great economic and community development work. How are Latinos contributing to regional economies overall?
I mean, there's not a place in the country where Latinos aren't contributing. So it's, it's sort of across the board in many, many ways. And I mean, if I think about some of what I saw in your slides, I also think about the subtext that is what is known from a data perspective or cultural competence. In places like Miami, it's no wonder that there's thriving there, because you can move about the streets, and to your point about language, you don't have to speak English in Miami, irrespective of whether you were born here or not. You can very comfortably move about in Spanish. And that same sort of business success that you see on your slide for Miami, it exists in places from a home ownership perspective as well, where Latinos are approaching the majority, or they're a sort of a super minority, if you will, from a housing perspective, because the people who serve the population have the cultural competencies to be able to serve the population. You don't have to explain certain things, are just intuitive, because I think of myself, I've been Latina all my life. So there's certain things that I just know about the community, because that's how I move about my own life.
Now, I have two Latinas on the panel.
I am not Latina.
You're not Latina?
So I'm a part of a Latino family. My husband is
Okay.
my mother-in-law, my suegra, is from Mexico, but I'm a black woman.
So a mixed race family.
There you go.
Mixed race family, Latina. Now, we saw the rate of growth among women is higher, but it's a smaller proportion of the owners overall. What are you seeing in terms of this growth? What are Latinas, what kind of businesses are they starting, and what industries? I mean, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, so Latinas historically are fast business creators, and it has been sort of an entrepreneurship out of necessity. So if you look at data coming out of places like UCLA's LPPI program, as well as content that Brookings and we produce, it's because there's tends to not be opportunity for you from a W-2 perspective in a job, and so you make your opportunity, and that also I would say is sort of a double-edged sword in terms of the growth needs that you're talking about, because when you're an entrepreneur out of necessity, you're focused on your current state needs. I need to pay my rent, I need to make sure that I have like food for my kids, I have to keep the lights on. You're not necessarily thinking, how can I make this enterprise $1 million enterprise and grow this so that I can scale it? And so the fact that the businesses that they're starting off in tend to be things that that you might imagine are stereotypical, like housekeeping, sort of service jobs. Those are kind of the known career areas where you can also have a side hustle or make that into your primary. Those are not businesses that tend to invite equity, that tend to invite the ability to scale in quite the same way. They're really to meet your current needs, as opposed to something that is a future growth opportunity. But the potential certainly exists for that.
I think just to add on to that, as Andre mentioned, I'm the Director of Small Business Development at the Latino Economic Development Center. And you're right, the types of businesses that we're seeing are cleaning services, childcare services, food businesses. And it is because they need to pay the bills, they need to take care of their children, but it's also because you may come to this country and it's difficult as you're going through the citizenship process to get a W-2 job, if you will, right? So out of necessity, and that I need to feed my family, I need to come with the skills that I already have and make a business out of that. The other thing that we're seeing as it relates to the growth, a lot of these, just like as you see in in Black business data, I'm a former entrepreneur as well. Our communities don't have an uncle that we can call and ask for $100,000 to start and grow my business. So they're bootstrapping it, figuring it out as they go, and a lot of times don't have the time to think outside of how am I paying tomorrow's payroll. So that can be burdensome as we're looking to grow.
Now, as you mentioned, there's a lot of these sort of mom-pop type businesses. But when you mentioned immigrants, they have one of the highest rates that might be out of necessity of business ownership, and they have a very successful run at it. What structural barriers do you see? And you can reiterate the financing part. What structural barriers do you see in getting into other industries that might produce additional revenue and employees?
I mean, to put it plainly, there's so many hoops to jump through for a lot of businesses. When we're thinking about government procurement, right? There's a lot of things that you have to go through having a great grasp of the English language and the American system. Me having started my own business and being college educated, there was still a lot that I had to learn. Now imagine if I hadn't grown up in the United States, or if my family couldn't provide me with information. That's hard. That's very, very hard. There are amazing opportunities coming up with the EPA's $27 billion into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund for these cleaning businesses, for our landscaping businesses to greenify their products and their business practices to really get a lion's share of the funding that's coming out there.
Do you want to respond to that? Because, and I just want to, because Latinos are very diverse. You have, folks who are new to the country, folks who have been here before the country existed.
Yes. The border didn't cross. The border crossed me. Right.
Right.
I mean, to that point, most of that growth that you're seeing for Latinos is coming from native-born people. We don't allow ourselves to get sort of wound up in what you hear from non-academic sources, that the growth from a population perspective is native birth. And I think it's really, part of the challenge is one of actual age-related demographics, that the population is a young population. 60% of the Latino population are millennials or younger. I mean, so there's just a lot of people who aren't even yet of age to be able to have the sort of business enterprises that we're talking about. So that in and of itself is a challenge. The other thing that I see, and I saw this from my time as a lender as well, is sort of a structural nuance complexity of businesses that Latinos form, and this is true also of Black business owners, that the entity structure that you select is in and of itself a barrier to capital. So most businesses that start up in this sort of bootstrap way from these particular communities tend to be an LLC or a sole prop. And so those are disregarded entities. You can't invest in those entities. They can't attract capital. And at the same time, they think about like Shark Tank and like if I could just get a VC to give me $1 million check. And the reality is that if you own a laundromat, or if you have, like one of what people call a boring business, those are not businesses that invite venture capital. And if they did, you wouldn't want that because it's extractive and then you lose your ownership interest. And so those kinds of structural nuances, unless you have navigated all of this, they tend to not be things that you know. You have to learn them along the way. And you have to be able to run your business while you're figuring all that out.
So tell me some of the policy solutions that you recommend with your organization to get capital to worthy entrepreneurs.
I mean, I think this actually is a space that's less about policy and more about public-private partnership. Because if you think about CDFIs, like the one that you work at, there's this sort of collective understanding that CDFIs tend to be first responders. They tend to be better equipped from an actual like perspective of the people who work there to meet the entrepreneurs where they are. And what they also are is capital constrained. And what they also are is small businesses, just like the ones that they're serving. And what they also are is businesses that were inherently set up to require subsidy. So none of that makes for a cash cow that is going to save small businesses in the US. So really what needs to happen is a lot more public-private partnership to be able to have pilots, some sort of proof of concept to stand up that demonstrates that the way that you credit qualify people doesn't have to be what it was in 1960s, 70s America, because the country looks different than it did then, and that different kinds of capital that are equity-based but not extractive, different types of solutions need to be really proliferating so that there isn't this either or. It shouldn't be just binary. You get to indebt yourself forever and maybe lose your credit rating, or give away all of what your business is because you needed that venture.
I want to echo that. I think one of the wonderful things that we saw in COVID is that before COVID, there were CDFIs were not known for grants, right? CDFIs were only loans. So once the door was opened for federal funding coming to help the people that need it through the CDFIs, we saw a difference there. But as she mentioned, even with a lot of those things, to put it plainly, there's not funding for our CDFIs for salaries, and somebody got to do the job. Somebody has to get the funding out, and the technical assistance, the support to the people that need it. So recommendations are to make that funding more usable for the CDFIs that need it to get it to the people.
So, you
I was going to say, I mean, if there is sort of one policy area, funding the CDFI fund properly is something that really ought to happen. I mean, because that has been, just a space that does not have enough capital, and it's a challenge for the, nearly 1,500 CDFIs or so to competitively apply for capital from there and then get a fraction, if they get something, a fraction of what they actually could use.
But I want to dig into this, but many, particularly Black and brown communities, are really resistant to any form of debt capital. I mean, we just don't want to take on debt. One, how can we get more equity in our communities? And two, how can we get past this? I don't want to call it a fear, because there is a healthy fear. Banks and other financial institutions have sold inferior products to Black and brown communities for decades, for centuries even. How do we move forward with more equity into our communities, and how to move forward with more equitable debt capital?
Yeah, I mean, it's a well-earned fear. And we're probably going to see a good bit of that approaching the housing space as well, as there's not enough, housing stock as well. So, I mean, if you think about the amount of just kind of going back to venture, if you think about the amount of venture capital that, made its way out the door in 21, I think it was like $57 billion was what was dispersed from venture in 2021. 6% of that went to women founders, a fraction of which went to Latinas. In 2022, 0.85% of the venture capital that went out the door was to Latina-owned firms. Magically, the same figure for Black women entrepreneurs. So really what you need is, other people at the top. The power brokers in these spaces are, they don't walk in the same spaces where the entrepreneurs who need the capital walk. And so there just is a missing lens. Like, we need a wider aperture from those that have capital, because to your point, most folks that are in communities that are starting businesses who are Latino don't happen to have a rich uncle that they can lean into, and they also don't have the social capital to be able to lean into spaces where they could navigate and find someone's rich uncle that could help them. So there really needs to be a broader social capital, expansiveness and more intentionality around, frankly, this is not charity. This is a business opportunity. There's incredible ROI, and I think that those of us who are Latino need to reinforce we're not pobrecitos with our hand out. This is a business opportunity that they have, and they can demonstrate how that's a viable business opportunity with the right capital partners.
To address your question about the debt, the attitude towards debt in the Black and Latino communities, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout my director of lending out here, Eric Lynn, and he tells our clients a lot as we work in partnership that a loan isn't always the answer, right? It's not always the answer. However, working with us and figuring out what the answer for your business is what's important. So changing that attitude towards debt comes with working with the resources and the resources being available to our clients to understand, okay, what type of financing is best for my business.
Now, and I want to get on to the scaling up businesses. We often just don't talk enough about business acquisition and merging. What can you say about the importance of acquisitions and mergers in scaling up businesses?
Yeah, we actually just released a report on M&As and sort of hyper-focus on Black female entrepreneurs, but a lot of the same data is directionally similar for Latinas, that in this country, we have the same sort of silver tsunami that's happening in housing is happening in business as well. So many of the businesses, just as you talked about, that are small businesses in this country are owned by aging folks that are white. And something has to happen with that asset. Disproportionately, those tend to be structured in a way that it makes them easily to acquire because they're like C Corps as opposed to some of the disregarded entities that I mentioned. And so really there needs to be a concerted effort to ensure that those who would want to either expand their business, that are in an adjacent business, kind of line or sector, can acquire some of those, those aging businesses, because it's easier to buy than it is to build from an actual operating perspective. Yes. And therein lies sort of a need for a different kind of capital, perhaps capital partnership, collaborative ownership strategies. So, you don't necessarily need to own all of the business, but if you had a capital partner that could help you to acquire the business and you could have a majority equity stake in that business, that would be certainly something that's scalable. So there's, across sectors, including retail and construction, a lot of sectors that are helpful from an infrastructure perspective to this company are going to be ready and available to acquire, or that becomes an asset that further widens the gap between the Black wealth white gap, the Latino wealth white wealth gap as well.
I'd say, as somebody who has sold a business, is that a lot of our communities don't know what that process is like, and it's difficult to navigate. It can be just as difficult, if not more, than starting a business, and so providing the education and help with businesses, not just giving them a loan and say, go be free, helping them navigate that as a next step of the technical assistance is very necessary.
Now I wanted to just ask maybe a final question before we go on to the next panel. We're living in a politically fractured environment. How are sort of cultural perceptions or negative perceptions impacting Latino business growth, and what do we need to do to change the narratives so that we recognize the assets that are worthy of investment? And I'll start this way.
Sure. I think that there is always a connotation of not being familiar, not having the skill set. Whereas you may not speak a language, you may have an accent, but that doesn't mean you don't have the intelligence. And so that comes into play when you walk in a bank and try to get financing and you try to get funding. And that's where the CDFIs come into play, where we understand our clientele, we understand the skills and the business ideas that they have. And I think that we need to continue to invest through public-private partnerships in these organizations that know how to work with the clientele to help them advance economically.
Yeah, one of my friends used to always tell me, and I learned this, I mean, you go to grad school, you quickly learn that intelligence doesn't have an accent. It comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. So, but I mean, we're living in such a fractured political environment. How is this playing out in the business world?
Yeah, I mean, I started my career in banking, and banking is known for homogeneity. It's not known for being a place that is like especially diverse, especially as you kind of go up the ladder of power and influence. And I mean, I think in some ways, like that in and of itself is a barrier, maybe not for the reason that you might think, but because it's hard, it's scary if you are not from the community that you're trying to serve, and that community has complexities that you're not familiar with. I would say most people who work in places come to work because they want to do a good job. They don't come to work because they want to do a bad job. But they also don't want to get it wrong. Because the stakes for getting it wrong are pandering, it's accusations that are like valid or maybe like not valid of racism. And so the fact that not enough of us exist in some of these spaces to be able to sort of broaden the aperture is itself an issue, because it's scary to venture into these business spaces and to do it incorrectly. And I think that where you see the difference maker is with organizations that do have lots of different talent at all levels of the organization. And I would point out, like from a housing perspective, New American Funding, for example, is a mortgage banking firm. They're owned and operated by a Latina, and she's got lots of different talent that's reflective of the United States all throughout her organization, and they're crushing it. And it's because of exactly that, because there are people that are part of the process that are reflective of the consumer. So I think that needs to be addressed, and then some of the sort of like politically divisive chargedness kind of melts away, because you have more people, and it's hard to other your neighbor. It's really hard to sit next to your colleague who you have lunch with, who you enjoy time with, and who you know is a human, and then to have some of this sort of like very divisive messaging happening. And I think that really is the key, is making sure that more people from more communities are in more spaces, so that their perspective can be represented in the products and resources that businesses make available. Because the reality is that population growth is coming from diverse communities led by Latinos. Business growth is coming from these places. And tomorrow's consumers and today's consumers are coming from here as well. And if we don't get this right, then there's just not just going to be a big gap and chasm. The kind of economic boom that Latinos could provide to the United States is going to be missed. And that hurts all of us.
You know, and I don't always want to make an economic case for investment, because there is a moral case. But we are missing out on some money here.
And I mean, and I tell you that I feel like, especially having been in banking for a really long time, I feel like the case that makes sense is the economic case, because for people for whom the moral or ethical messaging does not resonate, like that's never going to resonate. It just won't. It's not going to land. If ripping children out of their mother's arms doesn't make you feel bad, no amount of me trying to make that make sense is going to land. But dollars and cents sure do. And like if you're going to be worse off economically if we don't figure this out, then that is a compelling case, and that doesn't have a red or a blue color. That just is green.
So, Bria, how can people stay in contact with you?
Yes, you can find us at ledcmetro.org. Find me on LinkedIn, Bria Marie Hodge. And again, we are the Latino Economic Development Center, and if you have any referrals, we'd love to help them.
Marissa, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we're prosperitynow.org, and Marissa Calderon on LinkedIn as well, and would love to talk with you about all the ways that we are trying to change systems and structures.
Bria Maria Hodges and Marissa Calderon, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, you can come make your way up. Now, at this time, I'm very pleased to bring up two very important individuals who's going to have a fireside chat on this issue. Mike Argetti, Director and Co-founder and Chief Executive Officer and President of Aries Management Corporation, is going to have a talk with Rob Puentes, Vice President and Director of Brookings Metro. So thank you for agreeing to this, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I just want to say, Rob, before we start, I think giving me this box of water was a test to see whether or not I would actually attempt it in front of this audience, but probably not.
That'll be a good trick. We'll get a straw. Thanks very much, Andre. I'm Rob Puentes. I'm the new Research Vice President at Brookings Metro. And it's just been a fantastic day so far. I'm really, really happy to be here. I know the team had a great time in the neighborhoods here in Baltimore, walk around with folks who are affiliated with Brookings Metro. It's a great panel, obviously a great research presentation. I got to watch the 9th inning of the Braves-Mets game with one of the owners of the Orioles, so that was a pretty cool thing for me today too. So it's been a great day all around. But it is my pleasure to have talk about this fireside chat, pretend like there's fire here, with Mike Argetti, who is a co-founder, the Chief Executive Officer and President, as well as the Director of Aries Management Corporation. He's a graduate of Yale University with a degree in ethics, politics, and economics. He chairs the board of directors for the Aries Charitable Foundation, which strives to accelerate economic equity and equality. He also serves on the board of directors for Operation Hope, which is a nonprofit organization focused on expanding economic opportunity in underserved communities through education and empowerment. I'll tell you, the folks at Aries have been fantastic working on this event and working with the great Brookings team, pulling all this together. So that's just a short kind of window into his bio. You don't want to hear me give the whole thing. So I'd like to just start off, just kind of turn over to you, Mike, and just kind of introduce yourself, kind of tell us who you are, what brings you to all of this, and particularly how the corporation and the foundation play in this larger conversation.
Sure. Thanks for spending time with us this evening, and thank you for having this conversation with me. Without going back to my humble beginnings, maybe just why am I here now? I grew up in a traditional kind of what I would call emerging middle-class suburb of New York City. I am the grandson of immigrants, first generation, second generation, and third generation. My parents were the first in their families to go to college. Both of my parents were school teachers. So I kind of watched how they struggled, frankly, to support my brother and I, but also, how they navigated the economy and savings and the choices they had to make. My father worked 2 jobs, went to public school. I was fortunate enough to get into Yale University, put myself through college as a dishwasher in the local 35. And benefited from various forms of scholarship and financial aid. And then kind of almost by happenstance, I found myself on Wall Street and, had a pretty fast career and helped co-found Aries Management, 20 plus years ago. And I'm going all the way back there because a lot of my own story and journey kind of informs how I approach my work, but also how Aries approaches its philanthropy. And while I'm not brown or black, I did live a life growing up as a Jewish person that suffered from a lack of access, and some cases, hatred, bigotry, social stigma, etc. I did see that I had to work in certain cases twice as hard to get access in places that I thought I needed it. And I also now look back at how I got here and all of the services and structures that existed to support me on my journey that I know aren't necessarily available to everybody else. Also having founded a business that's now grown to be a $50 billion equity market cap company, I really understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur, how that feels, where there are constraints and pitfalls, where there are risks and opportunities. And so the Aries Foundation, as we conceived of it, Michelle hit on this a little bit earlier, really was born of an idea first to understand what is our place, right? We invest about $500 billion in private markets around the globe. So we're active in 20 different countries, making loans to companies and real estate assets, buying companies, supporting entrepreneurs. And so we have this really unique opportunity and perspective that we bring to the table. What's also interesting, this goes back a little bit to my parents being teachers, we also manage money for pretty much every pension fund on the planet. And I think there's a deep understanding within Aries that we serve the retirement needs of tens and tens of millions of people. And that comes with a really serious and profound responsibility to do right by them, right? So it's not just about making money. The product is actually supporting people's financial livelihood. And so we thought a lot about how do we create this, system where as we invest well and as the firm grows, that we can actually put that money back into the communities where we live and invest. And we also took stock of what it is that we do well, like what's our skill set, what networks do we have that we can amplify and make available to people in support of our philanthropy. So as Michelle articulated, we have focused largely with a mission of creating a more inclusive and equitable economy on entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurship, job training and job reskilling, and financial literacy, all with a view that if we can harness the power of our platform and open up pathways for progress, that it will then reinforce our mission. And so we've tried to create this holistic system where the better we do, and in fact, our foundation is funded by our investment profit. So we take a percentage of all of our investment profit every year and put it into the foundation. And our employees now, we have roughly a dozen funds at the firm that have contributed 5% of their profit individually into the philanthropy of the foundation. So we know now that when our people are showing up to work every day, they're doing it with a sense of purpose and mission, and they can then, have a real personal connection to the work that they're doing.
And relatively new. Go ahead.
It seems like we've been doing it based on what we've accomplished for a long time, but it's been about 3 years, yeah.
I appreciate talking through your lived experience. I think that really matters, especially the work that you're doing and just kind of the way you described how the corporation thinks about the philanthropic role and how all that comes together. It's important. It really, really matters.
I think the why, we talk about the why matters, especially when you're running a large organization, as to what do you stand for and why are we doing what we're doing. And I do think that it was an aha moment for our people. Back to it's not red and blue, it's green. In our business, financial services, a lot of times people are focused on the money and not the who do I serve. And I think that when we started to actually talk about our business as a service business, it was a cultural transformation for the company.
Well, let's stick on that for a second. Let's talk about the money. Because we all know, especially over the last few years, all these issues around systemic racism have been brought to the fore. What do you think the role then is of private capital in addressing those? You talked a little bit about this, talking about the corporation and the foundation, but expand on that a little bit more, how you think that...
Yeah, I think it goes back a little bit to, by the way, there are still people in this country that don't believe that there are systemic constraints to progress, so that's just one challenge that we all need to address. But for those that actually agree that there have been systematic constraints put in front of large populations of Americans, it does require public-private partnership, as we talked about on the last panel. What you realize, the more you try to promote change, the government can only do so much, and it can only do so much on a certain timeline. And just given how entrenched a lot of the structures that we have are, even when we make progress, the implementation is challenging. So, for example, with the IRA, with all of the great progress that lies ahead of us, the actual execution and implementation of how we get that money into the hands of the people that need it is still, there's still work to do. So government is critical, but it's not going to solve every problem. And the not-for-profit sector is critical, but it too is operating with a certain set of constraints. And so if the private sector doesn't get involved in bringing government and the not-for-profit sector closer together to drive this change, then we're missing a huge opportunity. And I do believe it goes back to the world that we live in now. You can do well and do good. Companies can actually make money and have their communities around them thrive and prosper. And I think the more folks in leadership at large private sector companies demonstrate that, as Andre said, that all boats rise. If we can keep demonstrating that, then I think that's how you harness the power of the private sector. But I think that there was, in my lived experience, but also just seeing it in my peer set, I think COVID and the COVID years did catalyze a new, a recommitment to stakeholder capitalism. That was really important. I think you're seeing CEOs of major corporations more willing to take a stand on social issues, understanding that social issues are economic issues. And people have gotten more comfortable being vocal about that and being willing to put themselves in front of them.
I'm glad you mentioned that call to action. I think you're right. I wish more people were doing that. But talk a little bit. So how do you work in these communities? We know the work that's going on here in Baltimore and the wonderful support you have for the work that we do in the community Center for Community Uplift. But talk a little bit more about how you work in communities with the work you're doing.
Well, first of all, it's a hard question to answer because we work in so many, and the thing that we understand is, not every community is the same. And the needs of every community are different depending on where you are in the world and what problem you're trying to tackle. So you need to approach each community with a real sense of the cultural nuance and the particular challenges of that community. Two, which I think is critically important, is we always have found that if you want to promote positive change, you need to have the people who are affected be part of the solutioning. And I think that there's been decades and decades where there was this top-down imposition of what we think is best for a community or what we think is going to work, and engaging the community in their own problem solving or in their own opportunity visioning is a big part of what we try to do. And as Michelle talked about, that some of that is engaging around what is the issue as you're experiencing it, and how do we innovate around some of these entrenched structures that aren't working. And I think back to the government comment, there's a lot of well-intentioned programs just aren't having the desired impact. And so if you can have the affected people engage in the solutioning and then bring innovation and have a willingness to test the innovation with real evidence-based practices, you can have a real impact. So I think a lot of it is just about that community engagement and then the measuring of our progress and just kind of iterating on that.
Sure. No, it's music to my ears, and the work that we do at Brookings Metro, for folks who know, we do a lot of this work in places for the reasons that you mentioned. We're very allergic to the made in Washington type approach. We're here for the government, we're here to help, that kind of thing. And there is a huge demand, to your point, of places to learn from one another. No place is the same. You can't just kind of cookie stamp these things all over the place, but there's a huge demand for places to learn from one another. We think that's really where it's at. So internally, how is it to change kind of your internal practices, either with the corporation or the foundation, knowing that this is kind of the motivating factor, what you're trying to do? You talked about the connection between the capital from the corporation supporting the foundation. How has it changed how you do those practices internally?
Well, it depends on if you think about our business, we've thought about our own business practices and operational practices. So where we can lean in, which we have on procurement and supplier diversity, and we can bring our peers along to aggregate our impact. As a large investor, we can change the way that we invest into the communities. And I want to come back to that because the viewing this through the lens of economic opportunity ultimately will carry the day. And I think as a company that invests money for a living, we see the breadth of opportunity in investing in these communities. So that has changed in terms of having an openness to investing in places where other people wouldn't. And then I think a lot of it is just through our philanthropy. As we've organized and aggregated the philanthropy and personalized it for our folks, it's had a huge impact. And the way that we go about it, while Michelle and her team have a best-in-class professional foundation organization, our people attach very deeply to the work that the foundation does, either through supporting the grant making, sitting on boards, getting into the field and supporting the work. So there's a very active engagement with the work that we do.
So where do you think those opportunities are? We do a lot of work at Brookings Metro on some of the emerging areas of the economy, around the green economy, around AI. We talk about Latino businesses here. Where do you see those opportunities, and particularly around the green economy, everything around climate change and AI? Where are the opportunities as you see
Yeah, I think we have to look at this as opportunity. I think climate is a great example. When most people talk about climate, they're going to be talking about climate threat and climate risk. But on the other side of the coin, you have climate opportunity in terms of green jobs, new economy, energy transition, digital infrastructure, and the AI revolution. So it is a little bit of a choice as to how you want to address. You can address the threat, but also address the opportunity. We, as one of our signature initiatives, committed $25 million to a program called CREST, which is basically all built around job reskilling, job training for green economy jobs. There's a huge opportunity as these jobs get created to train traditional economy workers to get those jobs and thrive in those jobs. There's also a high risk of worker displacement when you look at where a lot of these green jobs are going to come. They're going to come in communities with old economy jobs or old energy jobs that need to get transitioned. So again, we have to be mindful of the displacement, but we have to say, what are the strategies going to be where we can actually create programs to retrain and reskill these workers? And that's an ongoing initiative that we kicked off about 18 months ago. But similarly, that's a global initiative. What we're doing in India is different than what we're doing in the Midwest of America. So in India, it's as much about job reskilling, but it's also about helping small and medium-sized companies in India become more resilient as they struggle with climate change, because the worker displacement there is actually directly related to climate events and less about the energy transition. So again, what we're seeing working in India, or what the prescription is in India, is completely different than what we're doing here.
And then, so sticking with the green economy and AI, how do you think about the difference between either growing jobs and growing businesses within the Latino community or expanding to new opportunities? Is it tied up in that new economy conversation, or is it something different?
I think, so just to take a step back, because we talked about the numbers, but the thing you have to appreciate, the Latino economy is about $3.6 trillion in GDP in this country. 3.6 trillion. That, if you aggregated it, would be the 5th largest country on the planet. So if I went to any professional investor or any policymaker and said, hey, do you think you want to invest in India, right? Because the aggregated GDP is larger than the aggregated GDP of India, you would say, of course I do. So why, when you come to someone and say, do you want to invest in a $3.6 trillion GDP that's growing faster than any other GDP that's available, it breaks down. So I think part of it is how we frame the opportunity to invest in the Latino economy. We looked at the job numbers. We talked about the youth. The payroll coming from Latino-owned businesses in the economy is $100 billion. And so there is wealth creation opportunity if we can actually harness the GDP and the wealth, and that's kind of where we're spending our time, and a lot of the work that we're doing with you is meant to say, how do we understand that better, and how do we invest in whatever gaps exist to, continuing to promote that trend. AI, that's a tough one. I think, again, many communities are gonna grapple with it. I view it through 2 lenses. One, there's going to be massive wealth creation that comes from the digital revolution and the implementation of AI, and the wealth gap that we talked about earlier will be exacerbated, not helped, just based on where I think that wealth creation will come from, because it will come from data center owners, technology companies, and those winners have already been effectively identified. So I think there's a real risk that as the AI revolution happens, that wealth disparity increases, not improves. When it comes to the worker experience, we have to be mindful of, again, what is going to be the displacement of workers from the implementation of AI, or what will be the supplementation of people's opportunities if they get the appropriate exposure and education on AI and digital tools. So putting my risk hat on, we have to make sure that we don't focus just on the displacement, because there is a huge opportunity to train people to benefit from the use of these tools as they emerge into the new economy.
Huge opportunities, and I appreciate the numbers. I know that Andre, speaking of from his songbook, trying to understand the value of those opportunities for sure. I think we have time for one more, so let me just, I was joking about the Orioles at the beginning, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Orioles. I'm a huge baseball fan, for those who care, but it's a big business. It's a big business with a major presence in any city, especially here in Baltimore. How do you think about the role of an enterprise like that in the context of a community like Baltimore or any other one? But how does that work together? How do you think about it?
Carrie, what do we think about it? Carrie runs our community affairs practice. So, look, anybody who owns a sports team in a major city, I hope, understands that they are doing it to as a steward of the asset for the community, right? So I think most people go into it because they love sports. I think a lot of people go into it because they want to have an impact in the community that the team is in. I hope that most don't go into it to make money, because it's you may be disappointed. Vis-a-vis Baltimore, I do think what is so unique about the relationship of the Orioles to the community, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about my role and my partner David's role. The Orioles are inextricably linked with the city of Baltimore. It's not to say that most cities don't love their sports teams, but given the size of the city, given the economic impact that the team has and can have, it has a disproportionate place in the landscape of Baltimore than I think in most cities. And what makes Camden Yards so iconic, it was actually when most sports teams were taking their stadiums out of the urban landscape and extracting value from the inner city, Camden came in and actually said, we're actually going to build a stadium in the middle of the community. So that's the good news, but it makes the stakes higher, because at least, being new to it, we haven't really brought the community in to the stadium the way that we can, and as a result, we haven't built trust and that opportunity to then take the position that the team has and reinvest. So I think there's a huge opportunity in front of us at this moment in Baltimore's evolution. I think we finally have the political support that we need to actually be an agent of change in the city of Baltimore. I think we have built trust early, not just by winning, but by being in the community and coming at it from a place of understanding. And now it's incumbent on us, and we will have the opportunity to invest in development of the stadium and around the stadium. And if we can get that right, I think it could be a huge opportunity for the city and a huge opportunity for the community.
That's great. I hope the other owners think the same.
They do. They do. Yeah, we self-selected each other when we decided to be partners.
Any predictions for? No, I'm just kidding. I want to thank you very much for that. I want to bring up Andre and Perry to close us out here in a second, but I just want to thank you very much for the candid conversation, for the answers. Great conversation. Really want to appreciate the support for Brookings and for all the work that we do.
You guys have been great partners.
Fantastic team here. We really appreciate everything that you've done for us. Thank you so much.
Wanted to stay seated I'll just close this out. I just want to thank all of you for coming by, and also to thank some important people, the cameramen, the tech workers, the servers. Please give them a round of applause. Certainly Phoebe, Danetta, Michelle, and all the others, certainly Rob, Mike, Marissa, Bria. I think that covered it all, and all the folks I missed. I just want to thank you all. We are here for a reason. Earlier today, we toured the development of the Edmondson Village Shopping Center, and that development is led by my colleague Lanier Richardson. Please raise your hand. Lanier, doing great work. You know, at the Brookings Institution, we do a lot of national overviews, and we look at these grand trends, but at the end of the day, it's certainly at Brookings Metro where I work, it all starts with people in place. And it's important for us to come to Baltimore to see and meet the people of Baltimore because we are committed to Baltimore. So I just want to thank all of you for coming here. This is the beginning of an ongoing partnership. We'll be releasing a series of reports over the next year and a half around Latino business growth. So look forward to that. Please tune in, and I just want to wish you well. Have a great and safe evening. Thank you very much.